All right, welcome back to the House Environment Committee. With us is Harry Shepherd from Green Mountain Water Environment Association. And he's here to testify on two bills. I want to make sure we get to both of them, and our following witnesses have some pretty tight timing constraints. So welcome and thanks for your flexibility, Harry.
Okay, thank you, and you're welcome. And I think I could be relatively brief here. I'm Harry Shepherd, the Public Works Director and Town Engineer for the Town of Stowe. And I'm also currently the Vice President of Green Mountain Water Environment Association. I was also previously a member of the study committee for municipal connections. And so I participated at that level also. I think on behalf of the Green Mountain Water Environment Association, we are still supportive of S212. We've long recognized that there's some redundancy and overlap in the permitting review and processes associated with municipal connections. And I think the proposed bill goes a long way into at least potentially simplifying that some. I'll share that Stowe had a very village-centric water and wastewater system. Then in the early 2000s, there was major expansions to our water and sewer system, basically extending water and sewer all the way up the mountain road to the resorts, and then another branch that goes up to traps. And so that much of that work occurred in the early 2000s. And since I've been Public Works Director in 2010, we regularly, probably a dozen a year or more, are pretty active in the review and permitting of connections to our municipal systems. I think the bill, as it's evolved to incorporate general permitting kind of provisions to hopefully simplify the process some with the state, is a step in the right direction. I think it could be helpful in terms of the overall goal of trying to kind of simplify, what needs to occur in this realm. I will say that as the representative, the owner's representative, if you will, of the water and sewer systems, Stowe probably complicates the permitting process more than the state folks. And that's because as owners of the system, we have a lot at stake in terms of making sure that these connections are done right. If the water service, leaks, or the sewer collection lateral leaks, that's either wasted drinking water for us or, unacceptable inflow into our sewer collection system that, affects our capacity. And so we've typically do a pretty rigorous review of these things. And one of the things that would be important for us is that we still maintain the ability to do that. And I think that the flexibility that's worked into this bill allows for that. And the general permitting piece of it, following up a technical review, if someone was to be, a municipality was to be delegated that, would possibly help simplify the process a little bit for people trying to advance connections and the redundancy that may exist now with the state process. I'm sure I also agree with the goal of trying to get a separate kind of connections manual for municipal water and sewer connections, separated from the WW rules. Brian, your previous witness there, was very correct in noting that the WW rules are really more soils based and intended for on-site water and wastewater supply. And it will be very helpful to the development and engineering and municipal community to have a separate document that kind of focuses specifically on, what's required for municipal systems. One of the realities on the drinking water side that's not really addressed at all in WW rules, and I hope can be incorporated in a guidance manual coming out, is that really in Vermont, except for kind of single family or duplex type residential structures, most of these water services really need to be designed for fire protection in addition to drinking water. And those aspects of what's necessary for accommodating both fire protection and drinking water aren't really addressed at all in the WW rules, and oftentimes creates some misunderstanding in the development and engineering community as to what's really required. And my hope is that this future manual, if we're able to get to there, will focus some on recognizing that reality that fire protection systems need to be a part of what's thought about for drinking water connections to the buildings. And so I think that really kind of summarizes what I would say there. I would point out that in a couple of spots where it's talked about in the bill, regarding the secretary giving deference to licensed designers. I'll note that in one spot I see the use of the word may, which I think I encourage. And then in another spot it's shall. And I think that should be used with some caution. I think I prefer the word may. Not all licensed designers and engineers are the same. And I would like to not, I'd suggest that the secretary not get boxed in with that. The word shall, I understand the goal, but in some of the language that I see towards the end of it, where it's talking about if the town were to take the partial delegation to do the technical review, it says that, we shall follow that same deference to licensed designers. I think we would like to maintain the technical review authority, whether we're receiving the partial delegation or not. As a representative of as the owner's representative of these types of systems, I think it's important to kind of recognize that when the developer is gone and the engineers are gone and the permitting regulators have done their job, we're left with customers. And having this situation where the state is permitting and regulating connections to municipal systems, creates that tension where some of the state's prescriptive goals may not go far enough for what individual municipalities think they need in order to protect their ratepayers and do the right things for their systems. And so that for 212, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Do members have questions for Mr. Shepherd? Representative Austin.
Yeah. Could you give an example of where the state may not go far enough, like with Stowe, like what you would like to add?
Well, sure. The state's standards in the WW rules, I would call prescriptive. They require separating distances and certain types of materials. All of that is, minimum standards. But particularly with like changes of use, sometimes the state is really not aware of situations. We had one situation, a resort on the mountain road. We knew that the existing water service to the building was undersized. And there were already some issues during Columbus Day week or President's Week when we're, lots of customers, lots of demand, lots of folks using the system where that water system was really not functioning sufficiently for providing adequate water to the resort. We were aware of that, but then changes of use and additions and extensions of the water system were proposed, and it got processed and approved through the state system, and we had to say time out. It's only a 1-inch water service, and that's not adequate for that expanded use.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Further questions? All right, thanks for that. And now we can go on to the next.
All right, great, thank you. Yeah, I think the next is one that we're hoping to ask for a seat at the table for the Green Mountain Water Environment Association. Our members are water and sewer operators and taking on increasing roles within the stormwater world. We produce and treat and clean amongst our members an estimated 40 million gallons a day of drinking water and wastewater. And so we're really actively engaged in the water needs and community. And one of the challenges that we sometimes come across is that the anti-degradation rules sometimes make it so that we can't revisit things. There are aspirational goals in our water quality standards, and there are rules that sometimes evolve, and then, through practice and trying to deal with those, we discover that there may be requirements that get embedded in rules that frankly are not practically achievable. And so, when that type of thing occurs, we hope to be able to revisit it with the regulators and our rulemaking authorities, so that we can have potential revisions to things that we are concerned about that we cannot practically achieve. I think the goals of not having any degradation of our water quality is fully understood and agreed. But when things that can't practically be achieved get embedded in a rule or a general permit or things like that, we hope to make it so that there's some provision in the future anti-degradation rule or policy or statute, however that kind of falls out, so that if in fact something isn't practically achievable, that it can be revisited and the anti-degradation rule isn't used as a reason for not being able to revisit something like that.
So it sounds like you have some experience with this. Can you provide an example of how this has played out in your world?
Sure. Yes. I don't have the exact dates on me here, but I think in late 2024, there was a new general permit promulgated for the discharges from drinking water infrastructure. And that rule established effluent requirements that frankly exceed drinking water standards. Stowe is on a quest to try to find a new PFAS-free water source, and we are in the midst of doing due diligence investigations on a piece of property that we hope will prove to be adequate yield and PFAS-free. permitting a large water supply like that is appropriately onerous. But one of the things that's required is a 120-hour yield test. That is also appropriate for a large water supply well. But the effluent standards that have been embedded in this general permit have adopted secondary maximum contaminant levels for iron. They aren't even, and also move the decimal point one place to the left for arsenic. And really for this type of effort, we can't, we don't have groundwater in Vermont that doesn't have iron in it. And it's pretty common for public water systems to be treating for iron. And what we've encountered is that we're not going to really be able to perform that yield test with a temporary short-term discharge because we can't meet those standards. And another thing that's embedded in that permit is that we also can't use chemicals. And so even if we were to attempt to try to implement a temporary filtration system to meet those effluent requirements, we wouldn't be able to use chemicals, and chemicals are important in terms of trying to properly filter and make filtration effective. And so with the cooperation of the department, we've come up with a workaround where we're going to do a temporary spray field in order to avoid that discharge permit. But it's a pretty significant effort. That talks specifically about what it would require for like yield testing on a well. But soon after the original rule was adopted, it got amended to include everything that we do with hydrant flushing our distribution system. And honestly, we can't comply with what's being asked for that discharge in that permit to be able to flush our distribution system. Most of the water distribution system piping in Vermont is ductile iron. And when we're flushing the distribution system for maintaining our water quality, we're pretty much flushing iron oxide. And it's when our guys are doing the flushing, they kind of keep a look at the color of the water that's being discharged on that very short-term localized basis at a particular hydrant. And when they see that the orange or red tinge associated with the iron oxide is not flowing anymore, that's when they know that they've successfully flushed that section of the distribution system. And so there's an example of one where it gets kind of embedded in rules or a general permit, and then we physically can't comply. And so that's what we're hoping to have part of the conversation include in the future, so that when something is embedded in a rule or a permit that is not technically feasible, it could at least be revisited.
Yeah, and that was really helpful. Thank you. But understanding that that's a general permit, and then it sounds like you got a regular permit in order to address the drinking water effluent situation. Not that I do hear your point, but I get it. Like a general permit is for those cases that are within the bounds of whatever the constraints are.
And the department did offer for the yield testing. The department did offer the opportunity to go through an individual permit. Our challenge is that it took us about 3 years to find a site that hopefully is PFAS free and has the yield capacity in the aquifer. We're reasonably confident that that's going to be proved true. But we also have a purchase and sales agreement with a property owner who wants to get to a closing, and we were only able to negotiate a 16-month window for the due diligence efforts that we have to undertake, and the individual discharge permit processes and requirements in themselves take a long time. There's some seasonal testing that's required. It could really extend for an extended period of time. In the case now that it's just drinking water infrastructure, in the case of our flushing of our distribution system for our normal water quality efforts, for a system like Stowe's, which is very linear, and we can't entertain that concept of going through kind of individual permits for dealing with hydrant flushing. Hydrant flushing in the past has not been permitted at all. Maybe it should be. Maybe a general permit is a good option there, but we can't have effluent requirements that we can't technically meet.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. I get it. Thanks for joining us and for your testimony, and we hear your request, and we will take it under advisement.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. With that, we have Megan Moyer here from Burlington via Zoom. Welcome, Megan.
Let me just get my little presentation thing going. Second. How's everybody? How's the weather down in Montpelier today?
Great. Springy, overcast, a little chilly.
Yes. Okay. Let me see. Share this. Sorry, Zoom's a little bit different than the rest of the teams. But okay, thanks. Now I've got it. I also have way too many screens for anybody's benefit. Can you all see? Can you see that?
We will in a second. Yes,
Okay.
we do.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity. I know many of you. Hi, Amy. It's been a long time, but it's good to see you.
Good to see you.
And others on the committee. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Megan Moyer. I have about over 20 years of experience in the water resources world. My first 11 years were focused on stormwater and combined sewer wet weather management. And over the last 10 years, I've been in charge of what we call the One Water world as the head of Burlington's drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater utilities. And today I wanted to talk to you about two issues that are thematically related, although they do or would touch different parts of the statute. And really the primary focus of what I wanted to share with you is how do we leverage existing resources, and how do these questions that I have on my first slide, I think are things that I've been thinking about as somebody in Burlington, as well as somebody who cares about what's going on at the state level. But, really the struggle of how do we increase the number of affordable housing units, right? We all know we need to do that while we maintain and uphold our commitment to public health and the environment. And frankly, I'm concerned that unless state staffing levels increase significantly, is Vermont environmental review infrastructure going to be able to adequately keep up with at least the number of housing projects that we would like to see? And in that same vein, how can we leverage existing local review to ensure that those state resources, remain to support the places that don't have the sort of local technical capacity that maybe a place like Burlington or some other communities have? I also think we think a lot about how do we support densification of housing in appropriate places that have established infrastructure, right? So that as much of Vermont's open space as possible can still be maintained. Frankly, though, at least in a place like Burlington, this may apply to some other places that are already dense or sort of primed for density. the development of those areas isn't necessarily easy. And so how can the regulatory framework sort of adapt to cost effectively support the need for what in many cases is fairly significant and very technical local review? Now, just some examples. I don't know how many of you know Burlington, but we've got lots and lots and lots of pipes. And these pipes, I think you've heard from others, when we're doing a review for water and wastewater connections, it's not just about the water treatment plant or the wastewater treatment plant and whether that has capacity. That can actually be a quite simple exercise. What gets really challenging and what we spend the vast majority of our time looking at is all of these systems of pipes and whether or not there's actual space in the pipe to get the water either to the wastewater treatment plant or from the water treatment plant and the various other storage systems to a given project. In order to do that and do that well, we've had to do tons and tons of inventorying, mapping, and for both the collection system as well as the drinking water system, we have calibrated computer models where we can actually run scenarios and look at what the impact is going to be of a given large development, such as the one that's planned for the South End, on our system, and make sure to the extent that there is going to be a problem that we can address that problem either on site or through other projects. Another example of where things get a little bit complicated in Burlington, this plays a big role on the stormwater and on the wastewater collection side. You know, each of these colored areas of Burlington have different challenges and considerations, particularly the combined sewer service area, which is the areas that you see in purple or in pink. Those projects in those areas, they are possible, but they require an additional level of review. Fortunately, we do have, and we are blessed with, an amazing team of people. This is the sort of whole breadth of the team that works on water resources in Burlington. It's about 64 total people. But if you zoom in, there's a number of different positions that are either directly involved in reviewing connections, as well as supported by engineers, asset managers, people who can go out into the field and double, triple check something before a project comes forth. And you know, this is the stuff on the right is just a list of all of the things that we are looking at when we get a project at the local level. I think, you know, part of what was discussed in the study group that I and Harry and others were a part of when we looked at how to kind of unlock a potential different track was, you know, we're already doing a large portion of the review that the state is also doing. We are very supportive about the manual that's going to improve the consistency and how people are evaluating capacity review throughout the state. We're very interested in the opportunity to reduce the duplication of technical review. Right now, a project has to come to us to get that initial capacity ability to serve letter, and then they have to go to a separate office and pay fees for presumably a separate review while they're still going through all of that extensive review that I talked about where we're looking at sewer, water, and stormwater. The other piece that I really, really like about what S212 is proposing is the smart and efficient and frankly cost-effective leveraging of the existing strengths of the state wastewater database. I like that database. I use the database. People throughout Vermont use the database. My engineers use the database. And we don't want to create a whole additional system. So this is one of the pieces, I think, when we looked at sort of going through the old way of getting delegated authority, we got stuck on this one because I didn't want to set up an entire database and have to maintain it in perpetuity. So this cost that's been established of $100 per general permit, I think is reasonable to be able to access that system. And then for us, it leaves a little bit of financial room for local communities to be able to charge reasonable connection review fees. We're not currently charging for our review, but we would like to, but we feel a little sheepish about laying on an additional permit fee on top of the permit fees that folks are already paying at the state level. So with that, that's sort of my, speaking specifically to the language that is currently in S212. There is a related issue that does not touch the same portion of the statute, and should you choose to advance it within this bill, certainly it needs to be called out as a separate provision. But for us in Burlington, it is related. Chair Sheldon, would you like me to go through the rest of my presentation, or would you like to stop with the S212 stuff and then I can touch upon the pretreatment piece separately?
Well, we can pause, see if there's questions on the first part, but not seeing any. So I'm fine with you going ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So the other piece, and we had provided some language to the Senate side, but I think it was a little too late in their process as they were advancing 212. But we have presented a proposal to your committee to consider the ability to delegate or change the current approval framework for pretreatment permitting to allow for local POTWs, publicly owned treatment works, to have sort of direct authority over their industrial users. I don't know how much of you have spent time looking at pretreatment. I don't know that it's come up recently, but basically pretreatment are federally, so this comes from the feds directly, federally established regulatory requirements to control, reduce, or eliminate pollutants from what we call non-domestic sources of wastewater. Most commonly, you're looking at food, beverage production, the breweries, but there are a number of other types of industries, such as metal finishing, that have very specific requirements. These users are required to be regulated, and they're broken down in a couple of different categories. The categorical industrial users, those are the very specific types like metal finishing. Then there's a large sort of category of what they call significant industrial users. These are users who are larger in volume, who discharge usually high strength waste, or who have a reasonable potential. An example would be maybe somebody doesn't necessarily trigger the bright line test, but they've got large vats of high strength liquid on site. And if one of those spills, it could negatively impact our wastewater treatment plant. Folks often forget that wastewater treatment plants, they're not just systems of pumps and mechanicals, they're actually living systems full of biology. And when something gets discharged that the bacteria are not used to, it can kick off a whole set of processes that then make it difficult or sometimes impossible for those bacteria to do their amazing job. And then you can end up with violations of permit and impacts to water quality because the system, the process has been affected. The other users that can be regulated basically also include any other non-domestic user that discharges a pollutant of concern or something that could potentially harm the wastewater treatment plants. Some of you maybe remember back, I think in 2018, there was an audit by EPA that kind of looked at Vermont and how it was administering this program. Some deficiencies were noted, and from where I'm sitting, the state has been making a lot of steady progress towards compliance. However, I don't think anybody would disagree that the state program on this issue is still very much likely understaffed. Since 2018, it's been a little bit of a background project, but we have been working towards at least looking at what our industrial users are in Burlington, and we've identified quite a number of them. Only some of which have, I think only 2 of which have existing state permits. So there's a whole long list of folks that need to be brought into the fold to get compliant with these federal regulations. And doing so is going to take significant effort, even if we look at phasing those permits in. We've also done the work to develop local limits, which are the limits that would go into, or the limits of pollutants that would then get allocated out to industrial users, which would be necessary whether or not we had a local program or the state was permitting these on their own. So the tricky wicket here is that Vermont is one of 5 states where the states have all of the direct responsibility for administering these programs. You can see on the right-hand side, the POTW, that's us, is there. We are consulted, we are involved, but we are not directly regulating these industrial users. For many other states, and the framework on the left-hand side is not really it's not currently authorized or allowed in Vermont due to how 10 VSA 1263 is written. And from what I could tell and from past presentations, there's often a trigger in other states as to when they follow the framework of EPA regulates the state and the state sort of regulates the POTW in regulating the industrial users. And this is usually for larger systems such as ours that have a combined design capacity of over 5 million gallons per day. I believe we're around the 8 million gallons per day in total for all three of our plants. Why are we asking for a voluntary, I'm calling it delegation, it may end up being a different word. Well, frankly, we believe there's some significant benefits. We are the ones who are most familiar and are closest in proximity to our users, the collection system and the wastewater treatment facility. We believe this will pay dividends not only in bringing the existing users, right? We're not talking about new users, although we would also regulate those, but we have a whole cohort of existing users who I'm sure are doing their best, but they're going to have to do more in order to get fully compliant, and frankly, to help us and help the community not use up more of our organic treatment capacity than they really need to be using if they were just doing some best management practices. But once that program's running, when something happens, it's going to be Burlington's wastewater treatment plant operators that are going to notice something weird going on at the wastewater treatment plants. It's going to be our collection systems crew who pops a manhole and sees that there's a large amount of grease that's never been there, and there's an industrial user upstream, and we need to engage them in what their practices are. So it really gives us a little bit more operational control and understanding of what's entering our facility and being able to be nimble. We acknowledge that while this is a new thing, if we're able to go this direction, and there's lots to be worked out regarding the framework for delegation or the state sort of being the control authority for us. And there's going to be, and I would expect that there would be periodic audits, and those are going to use Vermont DEC resources. Ultimately, we believe, and I think hopefully the state would corroborate this, we believe that the local POTW pretreatment approach could result in potentially faster implementation of permit coverage for these users, and won't add as significantly to the pretreatment program that is already over capacity. At the end of the day, similar to our comments on S12, it will also allow us to charge reasonable permitting fees to support our ongoing additional local capacity without getting into that duplication of effort as well as expense for industrial users. These users are going to be probably incurring some additional costs in meeting the requirements, and we're just trying to make sure we're not overcharging when we don't necessarily have to. It is our belief or intention that the updates, the language that has been proposed to update 10 VSA 1263, it's intended to enable this framework to be an option. Again, a voluntary option. I think Burlington is the only one that's raising its hand. I don't think that the state is necessarily looking to implement this in any other places. So we do know that it's a little bit of a narrow focus for us. And then I just provided the language, and I think with that, I will take any questions.
Thanks for your testimony. I have a question. I guess just to help us understand further how this works now, I actually, and I think all of us were offered tours of treatment plants in the past year.
Yes.
So I did one in my own town. It was incredibly interesting and educational. But we covered in that tour how Middlebury works with these types of pretreatment operators in our industrial park, which I know we're much smaller than Burlington. But how would this be in your mind different? I mean, it seemed very much relational. They had very close relationships with the different industrial folks and could coordinate their needs And I guess I'm curious how you work with yours now and how would this be different?
Yeah, so right now for most of our industrial users, not the full list that the sort of expanded list that I mentioned, but our big industrial users, we do have surcharge agreements where we already do charge them for sort of the increased strength of their waste as a way of maintaining equity with our other ratepayers. But what we're not doing, and I certainly should talk with Middlebury, and my understanding is that Middlebury has a local program, but then additionally, those facilities are permitted by the state. So the Middlebury permits or relationships don't supplant or serve as the sort of regulatory mechanism. In our situation, like the being able to permit them would enable us to have stricter compliance regulations as far as what they could discharge and have an upset limit, sort of like there's a surcharge limit above which you may be charged a surcharge, and then the regulatory limit would be sort of a thou shall not ever exceed type limit. And by us doing a local program, we sort of check the box that already needs to be checked. These facilities need to get formal pre-treatment permits, whether they're from the state or from the local community. And my suggestion or our hope is that instead of having both, that if we're going to be doing a program that meets the rigor, why not just have that meet what would otherwise be required by the state, and therefore allow the state to focus its limited resources where else it needs to. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, is the state system limiting what you would set as your regulatory limits right now?
No, it's not. No. So we could have a local program. It's really just about the duplication of effort and whether or not why expend state resources if we're already going to be doing it at the local level and we're already prepared to do a program that meets all of the requirements of the federal regulations. And
Okay.
frankly, to be able to charge our own fees, it doesn't mean that we couldn't charge a local pre-treatment permit fee at the local level and then also still have those same people have to go through the state for a very similar review and very similar compliance requirements and so on and so forth. But in this day and age of limited resources, it just seems like it's worth exploring an alternative program for folks who are willing to voluntarily redo it.
Yeah. And we had opportunity to briefly talk with our legislative counsel, and maybe this is why you were saying it might be a different term than delegation, but there is potentially some concern about whether it would meet the requirements of the Clean Water Act.
I guess, and we do need to work that out. I mean, it is done in other states, right? So I know that Heather Collins has reached out to Nebraska about how they do the work, because I believe they're one of the ones that are in the 5. So my understanding is that it has been done, and certainly anything that we would do would have to meet the federal regulations.
Yeah, right. Do members have questions? Further questions? No. All right. Oh, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Representative Chapin.
I guess I was just curious a little bit about just going back to the general permit piece. Is how does it work in the rest of the country? Is this proposed general permit for connections common with your colleagues in other cities?
I don't know, actually. Harry, do you know? I don't know what other states do. It's certainly when I do, Googling of connection review, lots of other things pop up. So it would seem that there must be some mechanisms in other states. But do you know,
The first half of my career was in Connecticut, and I share that in Connecticut, municipal water and sewer connections were permitted only at the system level, not by the state.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that, right, the whole state water wastewater permitting program was set up, right, because of our commitment to the environment and making sure that everything everywhere was getting some level of review. It's hugely important, right, for our environments, but it different communities, as things have grown and as we're dealing with densification in all these different areas, I think local communities have organically started looking at it more closely because it's going to be my butt on the line when a manhole overflows and somebody didn't do the full check that they needed to do. We're going to be the ones who are in trouble. So I think we've now started to develop a different framework, and this is just about kind of rebalancing things from my perspective.
Great, thank you.
Right. Thank you again for your testimony.
Awesome. I really appreciate the opportunity, and reach out with any additional questions. Thank you.
Great. Right, next up, we have Josh Hanford.
Hello,
Out of order. Well,
that's 212. Josh Hanford, Vermont League of Cities and Towns. I can be fairly brief and don't have a presentation. Definitely not an engineer or a permit specialist, but I was on the working group a couple years ago that dived into the duplication of permitting for water and sewer connections and the effort that resulted in 212 to try to reduce that. Certainly learned a lot in that group that I didn't know. In the big picture, the league supports 212 and the efforts that it put forward. It was very clear in that process that the sort of reviews that municipalities did to look at connections were pretty different than what the state looked at. The state looked at, is there capacity at the plant? The municipalities review was much more, do we need an additional pump station? Are the pipes big enough? Are there other issues that were sort of missed in the state review? So that shed some light on where the group went and reached consensus on the full state delegation that had been in place for a while that only 2 municipalities used that you heard about clearly didn't work. They both turned them back. There were issues on both sides, as I understand it, and the state also had to match up records that weren't done in the format and through the database that they needed. And it was clear that DEC does, keep, they're good stewards of these records of information. And so the partial delegation authority that's in 212, we support. We don't know, maybe as you heard from some other witnesses, how many municipalities will really pursue that. Maybe just the few largest will find that worthwhile. But we do support the effort moving into this general permit concept. Think that those fees are reasonable and the ability for municipalities to charge a technical fee is supported and is needed, frankly. Also support the manual that DEC is working on that will improve this consistency and provide more information for municipalities and engineers to benefit from. So yeah, that's really all I have to say. Is this is a good compromise bill that moves the ball forward on something that's been talked about for a long time. Is it going to solve all the problems? Is it going to reduce all the costs? No, but it's the right step to take at this point.
all right. Thanks for your testimony. Well, no, we might have questions. You're not the first person to say a good first step, but you might be the first person to say compromise. And I guess I'd like to explore what those two, what do you mean by that? And what are the next steps, or what's the compromise?
Yeah, well, the report laid out a couple different paths. Certainly DHCD's view that brought this forward about some of the length and time and the permitting and the wish that there was much more mapping and data available doesn't really come through in this bill. So when I say compromise, it just means some people wanted a little bit more. And there was also, great testimony for some of the professional public works directors, Harry and Brattleboro and Megan and others that, felt, as you're seeing, they could even do a little bit more on their own and not have as much of the state oversight. But this also didn't fully go that far either. And so, I don't use compromise in a way that there was, horse trading about this is what we'll settle with. More that, like the work that we had, the time that we had, what we could agree to and get to from all the various interests, and a lot of the technical side to this was what 212 resulted in. And, just saying that this conversation probably won't stop. I mean, even what Megan is proposing, new technologies and on-site systems, there's always more work to be done here. And yet there's capacity constraints on, staff time. There's, resource constraints on dollars, what we have to do. And just saying that I don't think this is the end of this conversation, but this is the right way to move forward at this point.
Okay, thanks. Other questions? I'm not seeing any right now. Thanks for your testimony.
Thanks.
Members, Thomas Weiss gave us a link to the report. Maybe Kat can provide that for all of us. And since we have a little extra time, I encourage folks to read that report. I'm going to look at that while my head's in it. So that's it for witnesses for this morning. We will be back at 2:00 to hear more on, we'll hear the testimony we didn't get to yesterday on 325.